I'll let Dr. Eaglin make the presentation and get us started. Dr. Eaglin.
Well, it's good to be back. As many of you know, I decided to try to take some vacation days between New Year's and this beginning of school, and I had to be in San Diego, which is a nice place to go for the NCAA meeting. However, I got out there just in time for their fourth season out there, the flood season of California. So it's nice to get back to a place where the sun is shining once in a while and the weathers are nice, but because it was terrible out there at the time I was there. I've passed out, or had someone pass you, a sheet that has writing on both sides. If you don't have one, I wish you'd get a hold of one. There's several copies available. Or look on one next to you if the person next to you has one and you don't. It's not the first time you've seen these because I handed them out a year ago. And even though a year's gone by, I'm even more convinced that one of our primary objectives of this institution is to enhance the conditions necessary for our students to achieve and be successful. Now, I'm going to speak about this a little later and go into a little more detail in terms of what I mean. On the other side of that sheet, the mission statement for this institution. Now, this was not written by us. It was written by the Council for Higher Education. I think it's poorly written because it really doesn't capture what we are about, in my opinion, as an institution. But if you've never read it, I think it would be good for you to take the time to read it, because it does reinforce that we truly are a regional university, that we have a primary responsibility for some 22 counties in northeastern and eastern Kentucky. I think I've asked you this question before. It's kind of a rhetorical question, one that you don't need to shout out an answer, but need to really think about, because each of you would answer it in a different way, and you all would probably be right. But try to imagine what this part of the country would be like if it hadn't been for Morehead State University being here for 107 years. There's no doubt in my mind that no one, by one I mean no institution of higher education, would have been interested enough to devote the majority of its time and effort to work with the people of eastern Kentucky. If you don't believe that, just look at what other institutions have not done over the years rather than what they have done. This institution was placed here to serve a very special part of this Commonwealth. And because of its special place in terms of serving this area, it's important that we understand this mission and we really understand the people and the students we serve, no matter what our job is. Because if we don't understand why we're different than Walmart or Lexmark or Toyota, we're probably working at the wrong place, because we are different. And we have a very, very special responsibility, everyone sitting in this auditorium. And that's to enhance the success of the future leaders of our region. And in order to understand them more, many of us, including myself, were not raised nor spent a great deal of time in eastern Kentucky. I have tried to learn as much as I can, but it can never replace actually being born and raised and living here for a lifetime. But for those of us who do not have that experience, it is important for us to know from where our students come. Some 80% of the students that are here. So today we're going to be a little different than we have in the past. I am not going to speak the entire time, just part of it. I will follow up after a presentation is made by Dr. Ron Mitchelson. Dr. Mitchelson has taken much information that I think you will find interesting. Some of it will surprise you, some of it you may not agree with. But the fact of the matter, all of it comes from data that is true. And the more we know about our young people who come here and the older ones who've come back to take advantage, I think the better we are prepared to truly serve them and enhance their success. So Ron, if you'll come up, and he's going to go for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll finish up.
Chance to move to a place where you can see this screen, please feel free to do that. I'm a geographer, and I've never said no to the opportunity to give a geography lesson. This geography lesson is about the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and it certainly has a focus on this thing we call the service region, which is in fact 22 counties found in eastern Kentucky, home to 475,000 people, a group of people who have been written about in many different ways, some of it negative, some of it positive. It's a place of great paradox and contrast, from the scenic beauty that we see to the abject poverty that we witness in the region. And so it's a hard region to get a hold on. I've only been here for a little over 2.5 years, and I would not profess to have a good handle on what is happening in this region. I've learned as much from my interpersonal interactions with students and faculty and people in the service region as I have from a more formal look at what is happening in the region. And that's what I'm going to show you today, that formal look. Not a substitute for your interactions and your knowledge, but certainly perhaps complementary to that which you already know. 22 counties, 475,000 people. One of the most noteworthy characteristics of the region is poverty. We've made a lot of progress in this region. Some of it from inside, most of it from inside, actually. We hear more about the Appalachian Regional Commission and all of its help, but certainly most of the advances that have taken place in this region are as a result of the actions of people who live here and work here and learn here. The counties in red are counties that have at least twice the poverty rate of that found in the nation. I'll give you an example. The current poverty rate in this nation is 10.3%. That is 10%, 1 out of 10 of families in the country are impoverished. Those counties in red in 1990 have at least a poverty rate of 20%. Many of our counties in this service region have poverty rates that are 30, 33%. We have them as high as 40%, 4 times the national rate of poverty. Lots of success, lots left to do. As we go through this, think about opportunity. And we don't want this to be too depressing. There are just things left to do. When poverty is discussed in the region, often blame is placed. Very often the blame is placed squarely on the inhabitants of the region. And I guess one of the things that I just want to make sure that everybody understands is that there are things that have happened historically that really have deterred economic development in this region. If we take a look at the railroad system of 1865, the upper right hand, if we look at the paved highway system of the 1920s, the lower left hand, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that we got infrastructure Obviously, we've had our railroads and we've had our paved highways, but it came late. And that's a significant distinction. It came late. The place that gets it first usually prospers and builds on that infrastructure. It came here late. We can't just blame the characteristics that we see here today just on the characteristics of the inhabitants of the region. Let's update this infrastructural situation to the 1990s. This is the 1990s depiction of long-distance fiber optic capacity as related to our region. We still have inadequacy. Now, things are changing quite rapidly. There are already plans to solve some of this infrastructural problem. But this particular system has been in place since about the mid-1980s. And again, it's late coming to eastern Kentucky. Some of the advantage has already been put in place. This last slide that deals with poverty is a statement that I think is important. In the last decade, it's gotten worse, as depicted here by children in poverty. The situation in the Commonwealth has grown considerably worse since the 1980 census. In our service region, we have counties that have upwards of 50% of children living in impoverished households and families. And of course, life's chances for those people much more limited, much more difficult to overcome the obstacles that a lack of income provides. And that's one of the reasons why we're here, and that's one of the reasons why we're so important. If you ever wanted to feel important, be in eastern Kentucky. We're going to look at several categories of information now. We're going to look at some demographic information. We'll be looking at some educational statistics. We'll be looking at some economic characteristics of the Commonwealth and the region. And then we'll look inside the households of eastern Kentucky to see what we can see. It's a selective group. It's not a complete picture, but I think it sheds some light. One of the hallmark characteristics of the region is significant outmigration, which has taken place certainly since really the 1930s. So the post-World War II period has found continuous outmigration, except in one period, the 1970s, the rural renaissance, as it was labeled. All of rural America seemed to turn around. And it was kind of a fleeting glimpse of history, really. It didn't last very long. The 1960s provided net outmigration. The 1970s provided net in-migration. And let's update. Different kind of picture. Blue counties are those counties that have net in-migration. Right now we have about 13% of the Commonwealth's population. We can find statistics that show it was maybe 35% as near as 30 years ago. Part of that explanation is net outmigration. As you can see from the map, the blue is concentrated in what has been labeled the Golden Triangle, the I-75 corridor. Population concentration is taking place in those two general sets of locations, the Golden Triangle, the I-75 corridor. If we define the Golden Triangle as a 22-county area, it has half the state's population, stretching from northern Kentucky down to Lexington and then over to Jefferson County, home to Louisville. Another aspect of demography that's quite, let's call it troublesome, a rapidly reducing birth rate, as shown here as the red line. It really has been a dramatic transformation. If we look at the states of this union of ours, Kentucky now rates about 43rd in terms of birth rate. And we are a low fertility state, very different than the popular image that the state has amongst people from outside the region, certainly, and for most Kentuckians as well, surprised by a rapidly reducing birth rate. That's only part of the situation. That's the state total. Let's take a look inside the state. The upper right shows the change in birth rates between 1982 and 1992. You can see that Eastern Kentucky has had a rapidly reducing birth rate. Many of our birth rates in this part of the Commonwealth are down to about 14 or 15, almost European levels, whereas 20, 30 years ago they were 25 or 23, comparable to Latin American countries, for example. A very rapid decrease in this vital statistic. Lower birth rate, fewer kids. Those that are born into this Commonwealth, lower left-hand corner, those that are born into this Commonwealth are increasingly born to teen mothers. And we can find counties in our service region where 20, 25, almost a third of births in the county are to teen moms. And of course the restriction on life's chances, not only for the mother but for the child, not by necessity but certainly statistically, are well documented. One that's particularly important to this campus community, net out-migration, rapidly decreasing rate of fertility, fewer kids. This map shows the change that we expect to see in high school-aged population over the next decade, basically from the 1990 census to the year 2000. We're going to have a rapidly decreasing number of high school graduates in this service region. My estimate, let's call it a guesstimate, is somewhere between 15 and 25%, and I'd probably go with a conservative 20% reduction in the number of high school graduates by the year 2000. Certainly it has an impact on what we do. Certainly it has an impact on the kinds of markets that we'll probably be serving in the future. And certainly it calls for increased planning in the future for this changing market that we face. A very important aspect of demography that well, we celebrated last night, actually, the birthday party for Martin Luther King Jr. With a nice turnout from the campus community and the community at large, and a very nice opportunity to share with African American friends in an exchange of culture. One of the things that this region does not have, obviously, is cultural diversity. And this, in some fashion, is a problem. It's a problem when we try to train our teachers, educate our teachers. They have to know this material so that they can share it with their students. It's very difficult to illustrate it in this region. And as we look at some of the demographic trends in the region, at least part of the reduced fertility rates, net out migration, is attributable to this lack of diversity. One of the things I've noticed most recently is the lack of foreign-born people in the Commonwealth. Kentucky ranks 49th in terms of percent of foreign-born within the Commonwealth. Again, this lack of diversity is a demographic problem, but it translates into an economic problem as well, as we don't serve some of the foreign markets that we're trying to capture very well. Turn our attention to education for a few moments. Educational attainment in the region, in our service region in particular, Appalachia in more general terms, has been notoriously low. In the map on the upper right, we're showing basically the percent of adults 25 years and older who have not attained the high school diploma. Certainly we've had success in terms of GED programs, and we applaud these, but a significant share remain at a level which most industry and economic units in general find unacceptable. In the nation as a whole, 75% of adults have a high school diploma. In Kentucky, it's about 2/3. It reduces to about 67%. In our service region, it reduces further. The figure is 49%. In the lower left, we're looking at a somewhat different statistic. We're looking at test scores from the recent 1992 baseline test that was given statewide to high school graduating seniors of all the service regions: Eastern, Western, Kentucky State. Morehead's service region ranks last, the lowest average CARA test score of all. A real challenge, a real opportunity. Another aspect of education, a little more current perhaps, we still have a dropout problem. Certainly we have a past history of adults not having the high school education. We still have a high percentage of our young people dropping out of the high schools. We have in certain counties 1/6 to 1/4 of the students dropping out without the diploma. In many parts of Appalachia, they drop out for a good reason. There's a job. It might in fact be a low-income job. It might be at a poultry processing plant. It might be at a textile plant throughout Appalachia. But in this particular instance, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, they're dropping out without employment opportunity. In our service region, about 80% of the dropouts are not in the labor force. They've really dropped way out in one sense. When you think about these aspects that we've just looked at, infrastructural inadequacy, decreased markets, poverty, lack of educational attainment, it's not too surprising then to find that associated with these demographic characteristics is a lack of economic growth and change. And in fact, of the 3,300 counties in this country of ours, under 300 actually had job loss in the decade being shown here, that is 82 to 92. And many of the counties in our service region actually had absolute job decreases in the private sector during that decade. Some of the factors that we've just talked about help us to explain some of these trends. One of the biggest disappointment, the state's perspective, is it has been its inability to attract manufacturing to the region. We see growth in certain service industries. The fast industry looks like it's doing quite well. Manufacturing has had a difficult time finding its way to eastern Kentucky, and particularly our service region. And in fact, if you look at job growth in this state, 2/3 of all new jobs in the state were added to that golden triangle that I mentioned earlier. 67%, 2/3. It's a process of economic and demographic concentration that's going on in the state that's not uncommon across the South. In the case of manufacturing, despite many efforts to attract industry, it has not occurred. Still, 25% of the state's manufacturing plants are found in one county. It's Jefferson County. It's better known as Louisville. As a result of this lack of economic growth and transformation, we see a dreadful lack of job opportunity for many of our people. Unemployment rates in the region are notoriously high. These were from 1992. The most recent statistics show that out of the top 10 unemployment counties in our state, seven are located in our service region. Unemployment rates are high. But even more distinctive than this, there's a tremendous lack of economic opportunity, job opportunity for women in the service region. If we go to a county like Fayette or Madison, where Eastern Kentucky University is located, you'll find that in the neighborhood of 60 to 67% of adult women are in the labor force. If I go to Breathitt County, it's 25%. And 25 to 33% is the norm in our service region. Tremendous lack of economic opportunity for women, deserving of our attention. The change in income levels in the region, you may have predicted this from what you've seen already. In our service region, there has been an absolute decrease. Once controlled for inflation, once you control for inflation rates, there has been an absolute decrease in income levels in our region. Not too surprising given what we've seen in the past. Let's look inside the households for just a second. We're almost done. The households of our service region are under a lot of pressure. And the people that we serve are under a lot of pressure. They make a lot of sacrifices to get to school. They make a lot of sacrifices in terms of not only their mobility, but also in terms of income to get to places like this. The households in our service region suffer from a lack of accessibility to many things, including higher education. We find many households that don't have a car. We can find counties in which almost 20% of households don't have access to a vehicle. Telephone's even worse. Find households that might have a phone for 1 month and then turn it off for the next. You know the kind of difficulty you have in some cases when you're trying to contact students. Well, it's not too surprising in this region where in some cases 25% of households don't have a telephone. Difficult to deliver services, and we're a service industry, difficult, especially in an age when we're being asked to bring it to these households. Bring it to them. Staying inside the households. What do they read? And I view this as a symptom. You know, you pick it, whether it's newspaper circulation or it's your favorite news magazine. Here it's Time magazine. People in our region aren't reading really those things. They're going to benefit the region. It's a symptom. TV Guide, #1 selling subscription in the region. We look at the housing that these people, our people, deal with, and we find that a high percentage have inadequate plumbing or an insufficient kitchen. You name the structural characteristic, we rate poorly. Plumbing has a secondary effect, of course. It affects the water quality in the region, with which we're all concerned. Our region is notorious for mobile homes. With 13% of the state's population, the Commonwealth's population, 13% of the Commonwealth's population, we have 40% of the mobile homes. It doesn't bother me that people live in mobile homes. It really does bother me when there's not a consciousness about the simple fact that that housing is imported from outside the region. Now, I stand a little bit corrected. I found out that there is a plant up in Flemingsburg somewhere. But the lion's share, let's say 95% of that housing is imported, and we forego the jobs and the income that's associated with that kind of opportunity. Substandard, mobile homes, and yet it's very expensive to live in eastern Kentucky. In terms of that relative portion spent on housing, our families and household units spend a disproportionate share of their money on housing. They must. And of course that affects their ability to do other things, like go to school. It's not just home ownership costs, as in the upper right, including mortgage payments, but also rental units, extremely expensive, relatively speaking, in the region. I'm going to leave with this slide here. It's a map that depicts the receipt of food stamps by families, and these are family units, in our service region. We have counties where almost 50% of the families are in receipt of food stamps. And I end with this one because it only depicts a current situation in one sense, but it also calls us to think about what the next few years holds for this region, our service region. These cuts, regardless of your philosophic belief in the role of the federal government, these cuts will have a tremendous impact on our service region. Whether it's aid to families with dependent children or the food stamps program, there will be significant cuts in the near future, all of which will come home to roost here in this service region. And it begs for us to be creative. It begs for us to be helpful. And I wanted you to think about the future as we witness decreased number of youth to serve, as we witness decreased incomes in the region, as we witness a decreased role for the federal government in the region. I think we can be helpful, but it's not just going to happen. Thank you very much.
Well, people sometimes question your wisdom of showing facts about your region. But let me tell you some perceptions of the region that I have, and I think most of you share with me. Number one, we're a very proud region. We have a proud heritage and a proud background. But this is where our children come from. And it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. That's why I am concerned that this institution position itself, because we can't afford to lose any of these kids to this region. Not for our future. And when students come to us from these areas, they come really knowing not too much different than what they grew up around. And they're good kids, and they're hard-working kids, and they're proud kids. And we've got to remember that about them. I guess what I want to share with you today is that we should be doing everything as an institution to help these students become successful here. Many of them come from small towns or no towns. They're not used to bureaucracy. The only bureaucracy they ever hit really was in their county. They were probably known by their name from the time they entered first grade. They were probably known all through school. If the person didn't know them, they surely knew members of the family. There was always someone there that they could count on. Always someone there that would take care of them. And now they come to Morehead, which is a big city. Now, some of you who drive here every day from Fayette County to work, some of you who grew up in Louisville can say, how in the world can you call Morehead a big city? There are more students going here than there are people in one of our counties. Just young people in college matches the population almost of Elliott County. So this is a big place. It is a strange place, and it is a bureaucratic place. Now I'm going to put my preacher shoes on for a moment, because I want to tell you what I said to the faculty. Flippant remarks about people who are proud people who just haven't had the opportunity is wrong. And you do it, you should realize really what you're doing. And if you cannot work in a place like this with children who really can succeed, but you can't overcome your own prejudices, then you belong somewhere else. Now, I feel strongly that our job is to help people succeed, and knowing as much about the young people who come here that we possibly can, so that we can enhance that. And that's really what this is about. Now, this was given to faculty, and it doesn't fit every one of your jobs. I know that. And it's not all inclusive. You could add, as Ron did in his comments, cultural diversity. We are the most homogeneous grouping of people really in the country. Our young people come from areas where everyone is pretty much alike. Oh, we vary a little bit in terms of where we go to church and this, that, and the other. But if you look at the basic values and the color and everything else, ethnicity and everything, we're much more alike than different. Yet to succeed in this world, we're moving into a world economy that we have to know about how others think and how others react and values that they have. So cultural diversity is important to succeed in the future, because we can't be isolates. We must interact. So where can that occur? It can occur in a university. And that's why we work so hard and so diligently to bring people that are different than ourselves so that we can interact and learn from one another. But cultural diversity is not on this list. I only bring it up to let you know that there are other goals and objectives that are important. These are more personal ones, more of the ones that are necessary in working eyeball to eyeball on a daily basis. And they are also couched in words of what we are willing to do as professionals, as human beings, to help other people be successful here, because they are our future. If they're successful here and we can help them go back to their towns, they can be in a position, hopefully, to start turning some of these statistics around and start having opportunity for our young, so that our culture is provided with a future. Because the trends that we see now do not show a bright future. Education is the answer. Now, how does that affect you as a carpenter, as a custodian, as a secretary, as a computer programmer, as a head of a department that looks over a variety of other issues? Every one of you is important in that process, not just the faculty. Probably even more so than the faculty. Now, one common denominator, one thing that's true, is that everyone who comes here as a student is exposed to a professor. So it's important for professors to know and to teach from a frame of reference. But also every student who comes here interacts with us. They interact in registration, they interact in their financial aid, they interact in their eating, they interact in their ability to get around, they interact in their safety. There are so many things that they interact with us about. And while these statements aren't specifically to what you do, they can be modified very quickly in terms of what you're willing to do as an individual to help a person be successful. And that's why you're going to hear me over and over and over again say what I am willing to do and what I hope you are willing to do to enhance the success of students. Look at these for a moment with me, just for a second. Understanding our mission. We serve this region. I'm going to tell you, if we didn't serve it, no one would serve it. And I'll say this about, and some of you are graduates, Eastern Kentucky University would not serve this region. Not the way we do. Not by going out and doing and being involved. They don't do it where they are now in southeastern Kentucky. Why would they do it in eastern? We are the only institution, public, that sees this as our responsibility. Define what our entering students need to succeed. That's a continuing effort of what do our students, you hear what the state says. One of the reasons Akira work was up there. Our students have to overcome so much to be successful. And the majority of students from the region come here. And we have to be willing and able to bring them along, to help them catch up, and to be patient, because they are young people. Start from where they are and help them achieve standards of high achievement. Put goals in front of them that are attainable and reinforce in helping them to occur. So many come to you discouraged. I know they do. You can play a vital role in helping that discouragement turn to encouragement and helping them get to the right types of persons who can be helpful and useful. We are, I think, trying to tailor our curriculum and our schedules and support services But I don't think anyone does this. I don't think you have your track shoes on at 4:30, can't wait to get out the door and shut the lights out no matter who's out in the hall. I've never witnessed that here. I hope I never do witness it here. But we have to be standing ready to help. And sometimes our jobs aren't defined in hours. They're really defined in what we can accomplish. We try to systematically give the best we can. We try to reinforce it in our faculty to be the best we can possibly attract and help them to become better, and I think we have a long track record of being very good in that area. We want to know how and are able to do in order to improve student and our institutional performance. Our institutional performance ranks right up there with all other institutions, which says a lot about us, says a lot about you. In order to truly, in my opinion, do your job, whether it be the president or whether it be a faculty member or any member of the staff and all the various roles that we have, you have to be technically sound about your job here in relationship to our mission. If students have questions and you're sitting in a position where you have to be able to answer questions, if you don't know the answers, I can understand that the first time. I might even understand it the second time, but I sure don't understand it the third time. Because our job isn't to send students off somewhere else to get an answer. Our job is to find out what the right answer is and tell them. You know, and if we do that 3 times, I even learned a little bit about registration. A little, not a lot, Gene, but a little. Because if you take the time to help the student find out, someone else learns. You. And then the second time, it's hard. And the third time, it's a breeze. And I know the 50th time, it's a pain in the posterior. But not to that student who comes in on the 50th time and asks, because it's their first. So being technically sound, not just about what you do, but if you're sitting or standing or in an area where students ask you something, you have a great opportunity to learn yourself. And we're a very complex place. And if you can help make that complexity easier, then you have helped possibly save one of our valuable assets, a young person. Now you realize I define young, as older I get, young is really relative. I used to think that 35 was older. Now as my children approach 35, they're young. I'm not talking about just 18-year-olds. I'm talking about 28-year-olds, 38-year-olds, and then we'll jump to the 48-year-olds and sometimes the 58-year-olds who come back. They're young to this place because they're new to this place, and they're new to our bureaucracy. So knowing what's there and what needs to be done is important. Also, the human relation skills necessary to work in an environment where there's 10 times more than you can accomplish in one day, and then have to be bothered by students. Because some of you have said that. Gosh, if they just, I've heard it. If it just wasn't for the students, I could really get this work done. Well, you know, if it wasn't for the students, there wouldn't be any work to get done. We wouldn't have to worry about it. We'd be Lexmark. We'd be putting out commuters, or we could be Toyota and maybe have a little line here, and we could all put the bolt in at the right spot. But we're not that. We're a university. And students, believe it or not, are one of the central focuses of what we do. There's other things we do too, but they are the central focus. And so the human relation skills of working with students sometimes are really trying. As one who's raised 4 children, or one who was at least in the house where 4 children were raised, I could learn by association because my wife did most of it. I can honestly say that. But watching that and the frustrations that I have with my own children, if I carry them over to other people's children who come here and pester me, my temper might get this sharp or this sharp or this sharp. But the fact of the matter is, if we really believe in what we're doing, maybe that 50th time the same question is asked might put off a certain bell in our mind, or at least a light in our mind. And that is, maybe we're not communicating that very well as an institution if this many people are confused. And maybe I can be a help in trying to straighten it out. A good example is the infamous green card. Is it green or blue? Blue. I got greens and blues mixed up here. But that has been a very, good idea, but a very confusing issue with young people and with our students. And I'm not pointing any fingers, but obviously we've got to work on communicating better, because we must handle hundreds and hundreds of questions of students about that. And maybe when the 99th student come in, we're a little short. But remember, it's their first time. And so we have to constantly tell ourselves that these students are really trying to seek help. And when they come, it's the first time for them. It might be our 100th time that day. And let's take that knowledge, if we're finding that we're getting the same question over and over again, let's take it to the quote-unquote powers to be to see if we can at least straighten ourselves out, so maybe we only get 50 questions next time. But never back off our ability of trying to answer the question. And then the last thing that I think is so important is that when I go home at night, I hope you feel the same way. I'm pretty tired. I am tired. Believe it or not, I get tired too. And I'll go home and I'll think, was it really worth it? Do you ever ask yourself that question at night? God, was it really worth it today? Maybe being sick was better. And I always look back and think of what makes us different. What makes working here different than working at Toyota? I have nothing against Toyotas. They make a darn good car. But we are different, no matter what our job is, because our products are human beings, not a car that runs. Human beings. And no matter what task, every skill in this room is needed to accomplish that. Every skill is needed. Everything you bring to this institution is a necessary ingredient to accomplish that purpose. So yes, you're going to hear me harp, and I'll get my preacher clothes off here in a minute, that we all need to take a reality check from time to time, including your president, of saying these things are important. What we do is important. I, as an individual, am important because I'm part of that exciting process. And that the future really is affected by what I do. It's amazing if you've been around long enough, and some of you have, I know, in your capacities. And I don't think there's a person in this room that's worked here over 25 years that can't think back of something that you did that made a very significant positive difference in a person's life. And that kind of makes it all worthwhile, especially when they come back and tell you. Now, I realize that we have to get along with one another, and sometimes that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, and sometimes don't agree with this or don't agree with that. But if we put it in the context that if we truly can work together for this common goal of success, then I think we will enjoy and prosper in our work. I'm proud of this place. I came here 3 years ago, and I really am celebrating with you the successes that we've had. But we have really got some challenges ahead of us. That's why I asked Ron to make this presentation. We've got a diminishing population, outmigration, a diminishing financial base. We're a school of 8,500. That's important because that's a viability that we need. So everything we do should be geared to help this region. And every skill that we have in this room is going to be important. Truly, if Eastern Kentucky is to survive the way we would like to see it survive and prosper, and specifically Morehead State University. So I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you at sometime during this next 2 or 3 weeks that with your supervisor, you kind of discuss these things. All of you have meetings, that you pull them out, and you kind of adapt them to yourselves. These don't quite fit, but try to adapt them as statements that you're willing to do. That you're willing to do. And I'd like for you to give those to your supervisors and eventually have them meander through the organization so that sometime I could kind of sound and look and say, this unit really is going to try to do this. I'm not going to throw extra pay. I'm not going to take pay away. I want get that out of your mind. I'm really trying to get a sense of an institution, what we're really willing to do as an institution. It helps me represent you when I go out and ask for dollars for this, that, and the other. It is helpful. Let me end with one last thing and take about 3 minutes because I know it's been in the press a lot. It may have absolutely no interest to you, but I did tell the faculty this, and I do want to share it with you because I think anything I say with the faculty I should share with you as professionals of this institution. It's not my favorite topic, and it's not one that I've had a tremendous success with, but I'd like to talk about football for a minute. As many of you know, a lot of our auxiliaries, and football is an important auxiliary, or athletics is an important auxiliary of this institution. Many of our auxiliaries are things that cost money, whether it be the running of the farm, whether it be academic services, or there's a lot of things that you could point to and say they have this importance or that importance or whatever. I mean, everybody's got their own list and puts their priority in. I happen to believe that athletic and athletic competition are important for our students, and I want to preserve it. As many of you know, I had indicated through my own analysis that in order for us to be successful, and by successful meaning a Division I school, some of you know what that means and some of you don't, to operate in a league and to do many of the other things that the board would like to see happen, the Board of Regents would like to see happen, that we're really spending too much money. And that we had to look for some alternatives of how to do it less expensively. And as if you recall, I indicated that I would seek from the Board of Regents the permission to negotiate with the Ohio Valley Conference to move our football program from a scholarship, full athletic scholarship program to a needs-based scholarship program, which means we would not use institutional aid, but would use all other aid that's available to any student within the institution. Well, I failed. I've negotiated for 1 solid year with the OVC, the Ohio Valley Conference, and I've come to the conclusion that there are too many vested interests within the various schools. Everybody has a different reason, but they're not going to lower their costs in football. Well, you've read the paper about all the alternatives. The alternatives have many factors that affect policy. And therefore, yesterday I wrote the Board of Regents chairperson, Mr. Seaton, Bill Seaton, requesting that he now, knowing that I have failed in this negotiation, that he appoint a Board of Regents committee to really look at whatever alternatives are available to us in relationship to policy. I know that he has welcomed that recommendation from me and is probably even at this moment in the process of setting that committee up. But I do want to make one thing perfectly clear to you, because I know your neighbors might ask you, because you're affiliated with the university, you might be sitting in a coffee clutch somewhere and somebody asks you this, or maybe no one ever talks to you about it and you're lucky if they don't. It is not my intention to leave Division I. It is not my intention to leave the OVC. It is just my intention to see us bring our costs within relative sense in relationship to our entire budget. That's my only goal. Because money is so precious here that we need to use it as wisely as we can. So when you hear the notions that I'm the Grinch who's trying to steal football, or that I am going to relegate us to some lower level that no one will pay any attention to us, that's just falsehood. I've never said those things. I've said I'm trying to negotiate. I've said we'll stay Division I, and I've said that we'll stay in OVC. Those are policy decisions that only the board can alter. The board now has a responsibility to evaluate where we are. What the board will do is the board's business. If they ask me my opinion, I will give it. They probably will. But I'll wait until they ask, and then I will provide my opinion. Well, let me say to each one of you, I'm proud to work with you and for you. It's been a relatively good year. I think things are getting better. We're going to try hard to make sure we got some salary money in. That always makes people feel good. We're going to try to get some salary money in. We're going to try to do the things right by you. But let me congratulate you for the hard work that you do. Please take these I will statements seriously. I do want to hear what your thoughts on them. Thank you for your time today, and good luck.
Are there any announcements from anyone in the group? I see people are ready to leave and get back to work, so we adjourn.